carry on. Carrying on is only going to last for so long, but we're going to get carried on for something here. So we're going to continue just what we're doing yesterday. We're going to finish off this Mahanidana Sutta, the great discourse on causation. We saw yesterday, we took it all the way to how you become an arahant based on contemplating feeling, the various kinds of ways that feeling relate to the sense of self. And if you understand feelings in the right way, then it's possible to maintain that there is a self, basically, in relation to feeling. Because feeling is such an important aspect of what it means to exist, that it basically takes away all the foundation for any kind of self whatsoever. There is no experience, and there is no consciousness, there is nothing without feeling. So feeling is kind of a critical part of existence. And now we come to the very last part, and there is a few sections here that are a little bit, I don't know, they look like they have been kind of added in there. I haven't really compared this sutta. This sutta also exists in Chinese translation. I haven't really compared the two translations, but I know that there have been some what looks like some additions to the sutta. And I think these next couple of sections, they may have been added to what originally was a simpler sutta. So it's a bit hard to say because I haven't looked it up, so we'll just go through it and see if there's anything we can learn from the very last part here. So, after having then achieved the full liberation and rebirth, it ended all of this, and the Buddha carried on. It says it wouldn't be appropriate to say, and a mendicant whose mind is freed like this holds the following views. A realized one exists after death, a realized one does not exist after death, a realized one both exists and does not exist after death. The realized one neither exists nor does not exist after death. Why is that? A mendicant is freed by directly knowing this, how far language and the scope for language extends. Language or terminology or descriptions. I think descriptions is actually a better word here than language anyway. How far terminology and the scope of terminology extends, how far descriptions and the scope of description extend, how far wisdom and the sphere of wisdom extend, how far the cycle of rebirth and its continuation extend. It wouldn't be appropriate to say that the mendicant freed by direct knowing holds this view. There is no such thing as knowing and seeing. Or one does not know and see. So what is this all about then? So this is just basically saying that you cannot talk about anyone in these ordinary ways. And these are the ordinary ways that a realized person was talked about in ancient India. Either you exist or you don't exist, or you both or neither. And all of these things really, one way or another, they assume the self. Self is like the underlying idea that unifies all of these kind of views. That's why they existed prior to the Buddha, and they were based on kind of the ordinary understandings of ordinary people at that time. So for that reason, all of these are irrelevant, and they do not really, they cannot be accepted by the Buddha in any way whatsoever, or anyone freed through the same insight as the Buddha had. But also, sometimes people then say, well, that probably means that you don't know anything at all, because if you can't answer these four questions are like the foundation for what was considered understanding the spiritual life in ancient India. If you could answer these questions, you were nobody. You're supposed to have a standpoint on these important questions, right? So these are considered fundamental aspects of the spiritual realization. And so people would think that the Buddha doesn't know or see anything at all. But actually he does. So he does not hold the view there is no such thing as knowing and seeing. It's like countering this idea that, well, maybe that means you don't know or see anything. No, actually you do know and see something. It's just that it's more, it goes very deep and it's more profound than people are used to, or different from what people are used to. And that's why he cannot really, he doesn't fit into the normal scheme of things. So language kind of stops, all of these things stop once you let it know everything. All right, let's just leave that to one side, and you can contemplate that more if you like, and if you want to ask questions about it, you can, and just leave that too. Now we come to this other kind of slightly detour. This is called the 7 planes of consciousness and 2 dimensions. I'll just go through it just for the sake of completeness. But these are like planes or stations, called stations of consciousness, derived from the word titta, which literally means to stand. So you're standing somewhere. And the idea with the plane or standing of consciousness is that in any life, your consciousness is stationed in that life. And then you die, and then you may go to a different rebirth, and then your consciousness will be stationed somewhere else. This is what kind of rebirth is like. It means that you stay in that realm for that lifetime. So when you are a human being, you don't suddenly become an animal when you become a human again, or you stay as a human until you die. That is what station means. Yeah, you're kind of, that's where you remain. And these are different ways of kind of talking about different stations of consciousness and classifying this in different ways, depending on the kind of breadth. Yeah, you talk about these things with that. So you can say that one type of station of consciousness might be stationed in the sensual realm. And so if you're part of the sensual realm, then your consciousness is stationed in that sensual realm for that lifetime, or for so and so many lifetimes. Or your consciousness can be stationed in a jhana realm, so it would be the rupa loka. There's different kind of classifications. Another way would be to say you are stationed as a human being or as an animal or whatever. But here there's a different kind of station that is mentioned here. And this is a little bit interesting, so let's have a quick look at it. But there are sentient beings that are diverse in body and diverse in perceptions, such as human beings, some gods, and some beings in the underworld. This is the first plane, or first station of consciousness. Yeah, so you are diverse in body and diverse in perception. So we are all diverse in body in the sense that we are individuals, and perception in the sense that we see things slightly differently. Our perceptions of the world, everyone has slightly different perceptions of reality around us. So in a sense, diverse in individuality and diverse in perception. So this is the first station, yeah, that there are beings that are diverse in body and unified in perception, such as the gods reborn in Brahma's host through the first absorption. This is the second plane of consciousness. So here there are beings that are diverse, they have different individuality, but they perceive the same thing. Yeah. And so it means that there are certain things in the world where everyone sees the world in exactly the same way, even though you have diverse bodies. And the example here is the first jhana experience. It seems there that when you are in the jhana, well then your perception is exactly the same as everyone else in the jhana state, especially when you get reborn into that corresponding realm, the realm which corresponds to the first jhana attainment. So is this interesting? I don't really, I must admit, I'm a little bit, it's a bit unclear to me why the Buddha goes through these stations of consciousness. I'm not entirely sure, but let's just go through them anyway and see what comes out of this. There are sentient beings that are unified in body and diverse in perception, such as the God of streaming radiance. This is the third plane of consciousness. This is the second jhana realm, and they are unified in body. That means that they are basically, it's almost as if there is no individual difference anymore, but they are diverse in perception. And I'm not sure how that is possible. Don't ask me, where is the Buddha when you need the Buddha? Can you please explain this to us? I'm not sure what is going on here, to be honest with you. So let's just pretend, let's just go on to the next one. There are sentient beings that are unified in body and unified in perception, such as the gods replete in glory. This is the fourth plane of consciousness. So this is the Subhakhinna devas, and this is usually the rebirth correspondence to the third jhana. Yeah? And here you are unified in body and unified in perception. So what this means essentially is that all distinctions between these beings have been eliminated. You're just one thing. Yeah. If your body is the same and your perceptions are the same, you can't really distinguish between these beings anymore. They become one thing. Yeah? And so here is where you may be. Yeah, it's like people talk about being unified, the whole universe being unified, and everything kind of coming together. Well, this is probably the kind of perception that you will have at this particular point. So when people, come up with philosophies or spiritual ideas about the whole world being unified, that can happen in two ways. Either it can be a perception that you have that there is no distinction in anything, or it seems like the Buddha also said that there is such a reality where everything actually is unified, at least for those beings in that particular realm. So this idea of the Mahabrahma, where everything merges into Mahabrahma, it is not maybe entirely without correspondence to reality. It may actually be something to that. So this is kind of I don't know, it's an interesting idea that it is there, that there's some kind of unification in certain planes of existence. Why does the Buddha say these things? Probably to give an understanding, maybe an understanding of realities, that if you have these experiences, you know what is going on, you don't take it, understand it in the wrong way, you still understand that it is impermanent, that it lasts only so long. So even though you have these extraordinary experiences, you understand the limits of these things. Probably that's the why he will mention these things. There are sentient beings, like comes the last one, that have gone totally beyond the perception of form. With the ending of the perception of impingement, not focusing on perceptions of diversity, aware that space is unlimited, they have been reborn in the dimension of unlimited space. This is a fifth plane or station of consciousness. These are the immaterial attainments. They are sentient beings that have gone totally beyond the dimension of unlimited space, where that consciousness is unlimited, have been reborn in the dimension of unlimited consciousness. This is the sixth plane or sixth station of consciousness. They are sentient beings that have gone totally beyond the dimension of unlimited consciousness, aware that there is nothing at all. They have been reborn in the dimension of nothingness. This is the seventh station of consciousness. Then there is the dimension of non-percipient beings. And secondly, the dimension of neither perception nor non-perception. So these last two are not even called stations of consciousness. And the reason is because the consciousness is so subtle, or in one of them, maybe even non-existing for a certain time, that they're not actually called stations of consciousness at all. They are just a dimension, or it's something that happens, and then when you come out of it, consciousness rearises. So that's why they have a different name, but it is certainly a kind of rebirth, a kind of existence, or not even existence. I'm not sure if you can call it existence when there's no perception, but whatever it is a kind of station or a kind of dimension, however you want to call it. It takes time. Now, regarding these seven planes of consciousness and two dimensions, is it appropriate for someone who understands them, their origin, their ending, their gratification, their drawback and escape, to take pleasure in them? No, sir. Yeah, so this again is this idea that regardless of what these stations are, regardless of how utterly magnificent and wonderful they are, and of course they are utterly magnificent and wonderful. This is why people get very easily very attached to these things. So that's why you have to kind of keep your wits about you, and you have to investigate everything. And this is kind of what distinguishes the Buddha here from those other people who existed at that time, that he was able to investigate these things as well, and how they originate, how they end, etc., etc., and then finding the escape even from these things. It's really hard to find the escape. Imagine you find the greatest pleasure in the world, the highest happiness that is conceivable to a human being, and where everything is unified, everything kind of comes together, the sense of ego seems to be completely gone. And if you ever had an idea of a supreme God, this would be it. So surely you have attained to the supreme God. That's what you would think, right? This is so natural, and because it is so extremely attractive, the chances that you will hold on to it is just so incredibly high. Except that if you have someone to guide you, to show it to you that, well, actually, it is just an experience you're having. And it is a particular kind of rebirth that lasts for a certain time, and then it comes to an end. So it is this idea that you need to investigate kind of reality to the very core. And this is what makes the Buddha, one of the things that makes the Buddha so exceptional, because these things are inherently very hard to investigate. You want to take them as me and myself because of the supreme attractiveness of these things. So it kind of follows on from the previous discussion about happiness and joy and meaning and all of these things, and how careful one has to be to really investigate all the way. Anyway, so would you be right to take, is it appropriate to take pleasure in any of these stations of consciousness? And Ananda says, no, sir. When the mendicant, having truly understood the origin, ending, gratification, drawback, and escape regarding these 7 planes of consciousness and the 2 dimensions, it is freed by non-grasping, and they're called a mendicant who is freed by wisdom. Paṭicca-samuppāda arahant is what that is about. So here the Buddha has shown the kind of arahant who is freed by wisdom, and they have understood all of samsara, haven't necessarily attained all these things or achieved the relevant deep states of meditation, but they have understood all of these things. So this is why they're called liberated by wisdom, because they have understood all of these things. Anyway, let's carry on to the 8 liberations. These are the atta vimokkha, and now we come to the other kind of arahant, the upatabhaga vimutta arahant, who is liberated in both ways. So we have to go through the 8 liberations first of all. So Ananda, there are these 8 liberations. One 8, having physical form, they see visions. This is the first liberation. Not perceiving form internally, they see form externally. This is the second liberation. They're focused only on beauty. This is the third liberation. So these are some very kind of unusual descriptions of the world. Yeah. So why are these things liberations? Well, they are liberations in the sense that you are liberated from something, but there's still something remaining. It's like a partial liberation. There's some aspect of samsaric existence that you are liberated from. And so the first one here, having physical form, they see visions. So in other words, you are liberated from your own physical form. You have gone beyond that, but there is still the visions, there's still forms, that you see, and that is kind of the liberation here. You're liberated from your own physical body. That seems to be what it means. It's kind of a little bit hard to interpret, but the idea is that certain things have disappeared. Yeah, and of course, getting rid of the body is a kind of liberation. So if you get rid of that feeling, it is very positive. Not perceiving form internally, you see visions externally. It's a second liberation. So here you are liberated from anything that has to do with your own form. Attachment to that, you see some kind of external form. Not sure exactly what it means, but it's some kind of freeing of the mind by getting rid of certain internal perceptions. You focus only on the beauty. This is the subha. This is the third liberation. This is often understood to be like metta practice, where you have very powerful metta and you are liberated from all the opposing states. The opposing states are any kind of ill will, any kind of harshness, anything like that. And all of that is gone. That is called why you're liberated from those things. And this is what the Buddha said: if you really practice metta all the way, you can't get angry anymore. Anger becomes an impossibility. This is obviously taking it to the very limit to what's possible. So this is why this becomes focused on the beauty. Yeah, you have overcome the opposite state as a third kind of liberation. So, and then now we come to the liberations that are much more easy to understand. I'm just going to go through the, first of all, you have the first perception of immaterial perceptions and immaterial states. And so the first one is the space is unlimited. And of course, here you have overcome, you're liberated. The fourth liberation, you overcome all four, and the form is all gone. And there's a fifth liberation is unlimited consciousness. Infinite space is liberated from that. And then that there is nothing is the sixth liberation. You have overcome the dimension of nothing, of infinite consciousness. And then you go to neither perception or non-perception, which is the fourth material attainment. You are liberated from the dimension of nothingness. Yeah, so you don't even have to be aware that there is nothing. That's too much dukkha, so you overcome that one. And seventh liberation. And then totally going beyond neither perception or non-perception, you enter and remain in the cessation of perception or feeling. This is the eighth liberation. These are the 8 liberations. And the last liberation there is the highest kind of liberation, where you go beyond all perception and feeling. All senses. And there is no liberation higher than that. This is the highest liberation. This is the equivalent of Nibbana, of paranibbana, of the ending of everything. That is why it is the highest liberation. Yeah, so you're liberated from everything, basically. Yeah. Or actually not everything, because there's still a remnant left. So you have to come back after you come out of that attainment. You come back again. That is the non-liberation that kind of remains there. The fact that you have to emerge again. You don't want to emerge, but you have no choice. Samsara draws you back and wants to drive you on. But you are already on the way out. So these are the 8 liberations. When a mendicant enters into and withdraws from these 8 liberations in forward order, in reverse order, in forward and reverse order, wherever they wish, whenever they wish, for as long as they wish, and when they realize the undefiled freedom of the heart, freedom by wisdom in this very life, and live having realized it with their own insight due to the ending of defilements. They are called the mendicant who is free in both ways, and ananda. There is no other freedom in both ways that is better or finer than this. This is the freedom of both ways. You are arahant, but you have also attained all the various meditative attainments that are possible to attain, all the way to the cessation of perception or feeling. You kind of have a whole overview of all the stations of consciousness that exist in samsaric existence. That is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, the Venerable Ananda was happy with what the Buddha had said. So I'm going to leave it at that, because it is all very super duper refined, and I don't want to spend too much time on those things. I want to come now on to the second part of this kind of course, if you like. So we have now finished, in a sense, the look at dependent origination, and also with a few things on top of that. And if you want to ask about some of those things, you're very welcome to do so with the questions later on. But now I want to continue on with the consequences of dependent origination. How do we move from dependent origination, which really shows you the dependent continuation in samsaric existence? Yeah, it is really dependent suffering. You can call it that if you like. So instead of calling it dependent origination, call it dependent suffering. Suffering depends on certain things. Yeah? What originates is just suffering. Yeah? But then there is the consequence of that, and that is dependent liberation, yeah? Dependent happiness, dependent freedom from this whole round. So this is what we're going to look at now. And in many ways, this is more inspiring in some ways. Yeah? I mean, it's not that dependent origination is not important. It is important. And I think it gives a solid foundation for understanding how this process works. Yeah, but in many ways, much more interesting and inspiring to look at dependent liberation. How does the liberation process happen? And this is what we will look at now. And to start this off, we're going to start off with the sutta called the Upanisa Sutta. It's found in the Connected Discourses, the Discourses on Causation, the 12th chapter of this Connected Discourses, Sutta number 23. And this is how it goes. So it starts off with dependent origination and it carries on. So ignorance is a vital condition for choices. Choices are the vital condition for consciousness. Consciousness is the vital condition for name and form. Name and form are the vital condition for the 6 sense fields. The 6 sense fields are the vital condition for contact. Contact is the vital condition for feeling. Feeling is the vital condition for craving. Craving is the vital condition for grasping. Grasping is the vital condition for continued existence. Continued existence is the vital condition for rebirth. Rebirth is a vital condition for suffering. Yeah, previously we talked about old age and death. Now we have suffering there instead. As I said before, it depends a little bit what is used, whether it's old age and death and suffering. They are just different ways of talking about the problems of existence, really. But here it says suffering, because suffering is our immediate experience, including rebirth and death. But the understanding of suffering in all its breadth is what often leads us onto the spiritual path in one way or another. And there is a nice sutta somewhere, which I mentioned before, where the Buddha says that suffering has, I think I mentioned before, suffering has 2 results. Either the suffering leads you to seek, to search for something, and a lot of people are like that. They realize life is problematic. How can we find some freedom from this? Or it leads you to being deluded. You start drinking alcohol, you become stupid, do all kind of crazy things as a consequence. And so these are the 2 possibilities. And here, what we're going to do here, we're going to look at that condition where you actually go seeking for a solution when you suffer. You don't get so deluded that you lose the plot completely and do silly things. But you actually start looking for a solution in the world. Is there a way out of this problem? And this is why all of us are here, presumably, to some extent. We're trying to seek some kind of higher happiness, higher meaning. Essentially, what we are looking for is some kind of solution to the problem of suffering in existence. So what happens when you do that? What happens when you start to look for a solution? When you start to look at the world, you look at the various kinds of spiritual practices and paths that are available to us. Maybe you judge the various things. There's all kinds of things in the modern world. Some people say the real spiritual practice is to take drugs like LSD or something like that. That's what some people get into. And it's kind of interesting. You look at my monastic peers, quite a few who used to take drugs. But I never took any drugs. I'm kind of the exception. All my mates in the holy life, they kind of said, "Oh, you have taken drugs. What's wrong with you?" Oh, they actually don't say that, but they didn't say what's right with you. So, but it's very common, and because some of those experiences that people have, especially on the kind of psychedelic drugs, are they kind of open up to the mind to different realities and things, and you think, "Wow, is this possible?" And you're kind of amazed. I'm not suggesting that taking drugs is a good idea. I'm just saying that it is, there's this opening of the mind to alternative perceptions that is kind of interesting with drugs. But it doesn't get you anywhere because it's artificial means. And because artificial means, you always have to come back to reality at some point. And then you die, you carry on. It doesn't have any progress. So those people taking drugs who had a spiritual inclination, they often ended up as monks because they understood that these things are not really going to get you anywhere. So you're seeking in the world, right? And sometimes you seek stupidly, other times you seek wisely. So you may approach a spiritual tradition, you may weigh them up, and then you may decide that, okay, maybe this Buddhist teaching is worth a look, And then when it's worth a look, then you will approach a teacher. If you're lucky, maybe you get to approach the Buddha. if you're lucky, maybe get to approach someone like Ajahn in Thailand, some kind of these great spiritual masters, where you find someone who is really, really special. And then when you find someone who is special, who lives the teaching through their conduct, where word and action are in harmony with each other, but there isn't a discrepancy between these things. And then, of course, that tends to lead to faith. It leads to thinking, wow, there's something going on here. This person is really worthy of confidence. The teaching makes sense. They live accordingly. It fits with my experience. I don't sort of have to pretend that things are different from what they actually are. Reality and teaching kind of match together. And this is where faith starts to arise. One of those kind of really amazing suttas that you may have heard of is the Vimala in the Majjhima Nikaya number 47. 47. And Vimala means inquiring, one who is an inquirer. And in this sutta, the Buddha says to his disciples that you should inquire into my conduct. It's kind of an extraordinary thing. You should look at me and you should judge whether my conduct is in conformity, if it agrees with what I teach, how I speak, and what I say. So the Buddha claims to be free of defilements. Well, if you're free of defilement, does my conduct match that claim of being free from defilements? Do you see anything in me which looks like greed or anger or delusion? And this is kind of extraordinary. He says to his disciples specifically, judge me on my conduct, and only then, in this way, then you can decide whether this is real or not. This again is quite unique, I think, in the world of spirituality, in the world of religion. It's very unique to see these kind of things. And obviously, it is meant to inspire confidence. That's the whole point of it. So if you really look and you do see what is there actually matches, and of course, you're going to gain greater confidence. And this kind of invitation is one of those, again, things that make the Buddhism quite different from many other teachings you find there. So then you get the faith starts to rise, you investigate, you see things working in the right way. And then when that faith deepens, especially when you really start to understand what the Buddha actually is, the longer you practice, especially when you become a stream mentor, the faith gets established 100%. You really start to understand what the Buddha is. You understand that you have happened upon this gold mine or diamond mine. Actually, diamonds and gold, who cares? It's like this incredible, amazing thing that you have happened upon, whereby you can be shown that, like, as I mentioned so many times already, the very meaning of life, whereby you find the highest happiness that is possible to find. You find everything you ever wanted. And here is a teacher who teaches that. It's kind of mind-blowing when you come across that. You start to realize that this may be true. You see the conduct, everything matching with that. And of course, this is then why and faith, when it really becomes solid, it says here, faith is the vital condition for joy. There's a lot of steps in between suffering, faith, and then joy. But this is kind of where it ultimately leads. And this is where we have the beginning of dependent liberation, starting with the joy, starting with the understanding that you have really happened upon something extraordinary. Then the path really starts to unfold in the right way. Joy arises. This is the beginning. Pamuja is the Pali for joy here, I think. Pamoja, I think I've got the Pali here, but never mind it. So, and we're going to look at this in a bit more detail later on when we look at the 6 Anusatis, the 6 recollections, because the recollections of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Arya Sangha are really this particular means for giving rise to joy. So how do we do that? And then from that joy, from that feeling of uplift, of being inspired by what you have happened to find, then the path just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Joy is a vital condition for rapture. Rapture in Pali is paṭicca. It's a deepening of the joy. And you may have noticed it sometimes when you meditate. There is kind of an initial gladness that you're meditating. You feel happy about yourself, happy about everything going on. And then as you watch the breath here being the most important of all these meditation objects, the joy deepens. the world disappears more and more into the background. And eventually it feels like your whole body is kind of energized with this kind of joyful electricity or whatever, it can in your mind and in the body and all of these things. And it's like a rapture, it's like this kind of thing moving through your body. And this is described, it doesn't have to be felt in that way. It varies a bit from person to person, but it can be a very physical feeling. If you want to look at the various ways it can be felt to see whether they kind of, this is what you experienced, it's described in much more detail in the Visuddhimagga, one of the commentaries, the various ways that joy can be felt. But really what it is, it's a deepening of joy, a deepening of pleasure that you're feeling as you go through this. And it's a spiritual kind of pleasure. It's very different, even though it is felt in the body or felt physically in part, it's still a spiritual pleasure that you're experiencing at this point. 5 senses receding into the background, the body receding into the background. And then it says the rapture is the vital condition for tranquility. You keep on watching the breath, and you keep on taking the meditation to deeper and deeper stages. The coarseness of the rapture, the body starts to fade into the background. All of these kind of strong feelings become more refined. You become incredibly tranquil, incredibly settled where you are. Yeah, the body now, you can barely know its existence. Maybe there's a little bit of feeling of your breath still kind of in the background. You're becoming incredibly peaceful. It's like one of those meditations where you don't feel like moving. You feel like this rock doesn't want to move, a mountain. You want to sit for the rest of eternity. That's what you want to, but it's not going to happen. And you just want to, you're so happy just sitting there. Yeah, there's nothing at all that can really make you move anywhere. Any desires and things are really becoming extremely, extremely refined at this point. So much so that there's, it seems like your mind is completely free of desire. But of course, there's still a little bit lurking there in the background. And sometimes you can see people who attain this kind of deep meditations. And when you see that, it's like what you see is like you see a rock. That's what it looks like. And at this point, it's not maybe fully a rock. The real rock happens when you go into jhana states. But when these things happen, it's like if you see a person in these states, it is like there's no movement at all. And one of my favorite stories is a story from the early days in Thailand. This was when Ajahn Brahmali was staying at Ajahn in Thailand. Because in those days, they would always do meditation in groups, a bit like we do here. And so all the monks were there, and the lay people would come also to meditate on the Uposatha days, the days when the full moon and the new moon. And so everyone meditated together, and as the night goes on, usually meditate all night, people would start to leave. They had enough to go back to the cuties or whatever. And eventually there's only 2 people left in this room meditating. That was Ajahn Brahmali. He was only called Venerable Brahma at that point. And then there was this old Thai lady. These Thai ladies, they were really cool. They could sit on the concrete floor for hours without moving. And they were tough as nails. And often they would have good meditation as well. So this old Thai lady, Ajahn Brahmali, and she would kind of look at Ajahn Brahmali, and there was nothing moving. And she would look at him again an hour later, still nothing moving. Exactly the same posture for 1 hour, nothing moving at all, nothing. No breath discernible, absolutely nothing. And then time went by, and eventually she decides to get up, and she walks out of the hall. And she goes out of the hall, she meets another monk, and she says, "Oh, there's a dead monk in the hall." Right? Because that's what it looks like. When you sit still without moving at all for hours after hours, there's no breath, there's nothing going on. It looks like you're dead. This is where it is approaching at this point here. Yeah? When you get the passaddhi, you're starting to feel a bit like that, this rogue-like existence. Your breath is incredibly refined. There is still a little bit of breath left. Yeah, it's still there in the background, but so you still wouldn't be quite like what I was describing now, but you're kind of moving in that direction. This pillar, this mountain. And then from that incredible tranquility of mind and body, when nothing is moving, we don't want anything to move. There's a very profound and deep kind of happiness that goes with that, called sukha. Tranquility is a vital condition for bliss. The mind becomes completely still. The body is completely still. Nothing is moving. The inner life you have at this point is like this powerful limiter. It's like seeing the sun or something like that. You don't want to do anything in the whole world. And because you don't want to do anything in the whole world, because this draws you in, draws your attention in 100%. That is why samadhi happens at this point. Because the mind, all it wants to do is to be with this incredibly powerful bliss, an incredibly powerful experience. So then the bliss becomes the vital condition for samadhi. He'll translate it as immersion or stillness, final stillness, complete absorption into one state. And then, once the mind has experienced that kind of samadhi, this extraordinary experiences, where literally you have reached the end of the world. That is what is called in the suttas, lokanta, come to the end of the world, the end of the five senses. Then, because of the power of the mind, because of the overcoming of the hindrances, because the hindrances are gone for a long time, and all that is left is this extraordinarily powerful mind, really, really stable, cannot be cannot have any, no more fear, right? If you are a person who suffers from a bit of anxiety, fear is completely banished. You feel like the superwoman or superman at this point. Literally, I mean, this is what kind of these things, and it's because you feel like a super person, gender neutral word. Everyone is included in super person. Super being is more inclusive, maybe. But anyway, so because you are have this incredible power, that is when you're able to see things in accordance with reality. So stillness becomes the vital condition for truly knowing and seeing things according to reality. This is where you start to fully understand, appreciate impermanence, suffering, and non-self. We'll look more at this later on when we come to the Anapanasati Sutta, exactly how you see this and how you even see it in stages, through your meditation. But for now, it is enough to just be clear. This is what happens at this stage. Now you have the ability to see things clearly. Then now comes all the way to the end, all the way to liberation. Let's continue these stages all the way to liberation. Truly knowing and seeing is a vital condition for disillusionment, or basically giving up, or not giving up yet, but aversion or repulsion, or you can translate this word in many ways. Nibbida is the word. Because what is happening here, when you see the world as it actually is, what you see, remember, is that you see dukkha, you see suffering. You understand the problem of suffering for the first time. You have to have this extraordinary happy state to enable you to understand suffering. And because what you see is suffering, your mind doesn't like suffering. The mind turns away from suffering. This is why you become disillusioned with the world. That's why you get aversion and repulsion from the world. It's the turning away from the whole world, basically. And when the mind then turns away from the whole world, you are dispassionate. You have no interest in that world anymore. You completely let go of it. You are dispassionate with all of that. And that dispassion, turning away, giving up craving, that's what dispassion really means. No more craving, no more interest in that world. That dispassion is the vital condition for freedom. When the mind turns away from that world, craving comes to an end. That is the liberation that you're looking for on the path. You're liberated from the world because you're no longer interested in it. You have found something far more interesting, far more profound, the ending of everything. Freedom is the vital condition for knowledge of ending. You understand the ending of all things and how that is the highest happiness attainable. So this is this beautiful Upanishad Sutta. It shows you the causality of the path, all the way, dependent liberation, all the way to the final knowledge and vision of everything. And then again, we have this beautiful simile once more, simile that we saw before. It's like when it rains heavily on the mountaintop, the water flows downhill to fill the hollows, crevices, and creeks. As they become full, they fill up the pools fill up the lakes fill up the streams fill up the rivers. And as the rivers become full, they fill up the ocean. In the same way, ignorance is the vital condition for choices, because all the way up to freedom is a vital condition for knowledge of entity. So, that is the famous Upanishad Sutta that connects up dependent origination with dependent liberation. Yeah? It shows how it all kind of works together. So now, having looked at the basic idea of all of these, of this dependent liberation sequence, I'm going to look at the dependent liberation sequence from another slightly different point of view. It's the same sequence, but there is some added information. Some of this information I've already spoken about before now, but it adds something that makes this whole sequence very interesting. This sutta is called Making a Wish. It's known as the Chaitanya Sutta. It's from the Numerical Discourses, chapter 10, sutta number 2. So this is how it goes. This is one of those suttas that I usually teach on every retreat that I teach, because it is such a beautiful way of thinking about the whole process of meditation and gradual liberation of everything. So the Buddha says, mendicants, an ethical person who has fulfilled ethical conduct need not make a wish. May I have no regrets. It is only natural that an ethical person has no regrets. When you have no regrets, you need not make a wish. May I feel joy. It is only natural that joy springs up when you have no regrets. When you feel joy, you need not make a wish. May I experience rapture. It is only natural that rapture arises when you are joyful. When your mind is full of rapture, you need not make a wish. May the body become tranquil. It is only natural that your body becomes tranquil when your mind is full of rapture. When your body is tranquil, you need not make a wish. May I feel bliss. It is only natural to feel bliss when your body is tranquil. When you feel bliss, you need not make a wish. May my mind be stilled. It is only natural for the mind to be stilled when you feel bliss. When your mind is still, you need not make a wish. May I truly know and see. It is only natural to truly know and see when your mind is stilled. When you truly know and see, you need not make a wish. May I become disillusioned and dispassionate. It is only natural to become disillusioned and dispassionate when you truly know and see. When you are disillusioned and dispassionate, you need not make a wish. May I realize knowledge and vision of freedom. It is only natural to realize knowledge and vision of freedom when you are disillusioned and dispassionate. So you can see it's very similar to the previous sequence. There's a slight differences here. And one of the most important differences that this particular sequence starts off with virtue or ethical conduct, whereas the previous one really started out with faith. Faith comes from suffering, and everything comes from there. So this idea that it comes from ethical conduct is in fact much more common in the suttas. Because ethical conduct is something that we can do straight away. Having faith in the Buddha is a bit more difficult to get joy from faith. It takes a lot of development to do that, but ethical conduct is very practical. There's something straight away that we know how to do, and we know basically, we talk about this a lot already, and so it's very pragmatic. And then it says this beautiful thing, well, if your conduct is really, if your conduct is ethical, you need not make a wish. And in fact, this is actually an understatement of what the sutta says. The sutta says, na chetanaya karaniya, which means this cannot be done by willing. This cannot be done by intention. So the movement to have no regrets because of good conduct cannot be done by intention. It is natural, as it says here. It is only natural that this happens. Dhammata means it is in accordance with nature. It is one thing leading on to something else. And because it is in accordance with nature, because it is natural, if you try to make it happen by an act of the will, where you try to force yourself not to have any remorse for whatever, you're basically going to go counter to nature, and you're going to make it more difficult for it to happen. So you want nature to take its course. You want these things to happen as they really, according to the way they really are, not force these things into existence. So this is kind of the whole idea of not using willpower on this path, especially in meditation practice. So when we don't use willpower, well, we have to do something else. And what we have to do is we have to put the root causes into place. And here, of course, the root cause for this whole sequence is ethics, it's morality, it's kindness, it's living well, it's living with a good heart. This is the root cause of everything. And once that root cause is in place, then every step on this path is a natural follow-up from the previous one, all the way down to liberation. Yeah? Everything else happens naturally. So why does that happen naturally to us? Why? How come we're not living it already? We're all good people. Our conduct is already ethical, already keeping the 5 precepts. I've already given a donation to Chiloran Monastery. Why? I should be arahant by now. Yeah? And we are on the right track, right? We're heading in the right direction. But again, the point is that the bar here for ethical conduct is extremely high on the Buddhist path. We saw in the previous sutta, we saw how the sutta-retreat, the 3 kinds of good conduct, are the cause for the mindfulness meditation. Yeah, that's where it really happens. And you can argue that even the mindfulness meditation itself is a kind of ethical conduct because we're learning to overcome more defilements. So ethical conduct really leads you all the way to the jhana states. Yeah, almost all the way to the end of the path. So it is a very high bar to clear. So we should always, this sutta here really proves the point. If your meditation stops, if it plateaus at a certain level, you can't go any deeper, getting frustrated, whatever it is, really you go back to ethical conduct. You ask yourself, what can I do even better? Can I become even more kind? Okay, I'm kind already. How can I be super duper kind rather than just super kind? Super kind not enough. I need to be super duper kind from now on. So we really kind of you really have this kind of honesty that goes very, very deeply inside to ask how we can make these things even more powerful. How can I be the person who lives up to the simile of the soul, right? That sort of thing. And that is, of course, very, it is not difficult, but it is demanding in terms of perseverance, in terms of being willing to look at the conduct, in terms of the paṭicca-samuppāda, the power of reflection, using yoniso-manasikara and all of these kinds of things. So this is what is of critical interest in the sutta, is this idea that the path is really automatic. What we have to do is putting in the causes. It is the causes that matter. Once the causes are in place, the path unfolds by itself. All you have to do, close your eyes, allow everything to happen, and bang, you're an arahant at the end of it all. That's kind of what the sutta says. And if you don't believe it, well, if the Buddha got it right, then this is exactly what happens. So this is very useful information. Yeah. Then we have this kind of sequence of things. So first of all, we have no regrets. What does it mean not to have any regrets? Well, it does not just mean that you think, oh no, I shouldn't have done that. That's a very coarse kind of regret. It means any kind of conduct that affects your mind in a negative way. Your mind isn't fully bright. There's a little kind of a shadow on your mind or something like that. It is a little bit darker than it should be. That is here part of the idea of regret. Yeah, it's a very profound thing. Yeah. Anything which does not allow you the full brightness of the mind. Yeah. So this happens naturally if the conduct is super duper pure. And then every stage happens after that. Yeah. And so and this is the sequence really that happens in meditation practice. Yeah. You're watching the breath and this all unfolds naturally. And one of the things that is really interesting about this, yeah, this is the psychology of meditation, the first person perspective of meditation. And if you look at that sequence of experiences that you're supposed to have in meditation when it works, is just extraordinary. Yeah, look at that. It's all about joy, happiness, and tranquility all the way. Everything is about happiness and joy. Yeah, you start off with no regrets. Okay, no regrets doesn't sound that interesting, but it's still good, right? Then you have joy. Then you have rapture. Then you have tranquility. Then you have bliss. Yeah, and then comes samadhi, where we can assume that samadhi is also pretty good, right? Everything, all the way to the jhana states, is all about happiness and tranquility. Later on, when we come to the Anapanasati Sutta, this is even more drawn out. There's even more steps in between, again, showing exactly the same path. This is what meditation is about. This is such an important message. Such an important message to everyone in the world, because there's far too many people who do the paṭicca-samuppāda yoga practice, the self-torment practice. Yeah, this is so common in the Buddhist world, but actually there's no need for that self-torment. There's no need to try to get insight into pain, sitting with pain hour after hour. Usually it doesn't give rise to insight, it just gives rise to frustration. And you never come back to meditation ever again afterwards, because you're so fed up with all the pain. That's also what happens. So meditation is all about bliss. It is all about happiness. And if you understand how the path works, understanding pain and kind of realizing what these things are about, you understand that not by contemplating pain, but by having bliss, because through the absence of pain, that is actually how you understand pain. There's no need, when the Satipatthana Sutta says, well, you contemplate the painful feeling, the happy feeling. Actually, that contemplation does not happen by actually being aware of painful feelings. It happens through understanding painful feelings through their absence. That is the most powerful way of understanding anything, is to understand it through its absence when it has ceased. And this is kind of an eye-opener. And it was such an eye-opener for me, because when I started reading the Anapanasati Sutta, the Sutta on mindfulness of breathing, which we're going to look at later on, I realized that this is a full expression of the Satipatthana Sutta. Mindfulness of breathing and Satipatthana is exactly the same thing. You do all Satipatthana simply by watching the breath. But there is no mention of pain anywhere in the Anapanasati Sutta. There's no mention of negative mental qualities anywhere. Yeah? So how is that possible? And the way to understand it is simply that you understand these things indirectly through the absence, not by contemplating them directly. You see them fade away, you see them reach cessation, and that's how you understand these things. And this too here is the proof of the pudding. Yeah? Meditation is all about joy and tranquility. It's such an uplifting idea. Yeah? It means that wherever you are on the path, make sure that you always try to enjoy the meditation practice. Meditation is supposed to be enjoyable, right? And if it means that if you haven't experienced all that much tranquility and joy still, this is what is awaiting you. Yeah, isn't that kind of a delightful thing to know? It is not just a little bit of happiness, it's mind-blowing amounts of happiness and tranquility. Out of this world, things that you never thought was possible to experience. Yay! Okay. They're out. Anyway, so it is 1 minute past 10, so that is a good time to start. So anyway, so just we're going to carry on, of course, later on this evening with more of the same. It's going to be all about joy and bliss and happiness from now on until the end of the retreat, which is good news. And then, of course, we're going to have Venerable Vimala's a meditation again this today. Yeah. More death contemplation, okay? So if you're keen on death, then please come out at 2 o'clock. Yeah. And in the meantime, please have a nice lunch as always, and we'll see you later.